Hello, everyone, and good morning to our international audience. Thank you for joining our session today. The theme of this session is global investors and economic experts speak on startup investment. Before going into the session, please allow me to introduce great speakers briefly. From my side, Serizawa-san, David-san, Murat-san, thank you for joining us today. Please give them a loud hand. In this session, we would like to discuss three topics. First, what is the world economic startup situation and global startup investment trends? Second, how are the roles of startup ecosystem stakeholders evolving? Finally, how can we make Tokyo more attractive for entrepreneurs and startups? Let's get started. And I'll begin with this first topic. I'd like it to direct to David-san first. And with recent pandemic and a potential recession, what factors are affecting economic trends and startup investment?
Well, the single biggest factor is just the increase in inflation that has resulted from the cost of the response to COVID-19. You know, we can't really even remotely imagine how horrible COVID-19 was in terms of the cost it imposed on the world economy. Roughly, in the United States case, about 60% cost of GDP in terms of fiscal and monetary stimulus. That's going to be reflected in longer term and higher than expected inflation for several years to come. As the inflationary environment goes up, the credit conditions for the Federal Reserve and the Bank of Japan and other central banks tighten. That makes it harder to take companies public. So the key thing for you all to understand is that the main way entrepreneurial startups succeed is through IPOs. And that's the same in Tokyo Stock Exchange or in Europe as it is in the United States on the NASDAQ. The IPO market has basically dried up recently. Mm-hmm. The other thing that's dried up is new capital for most types of venture businesses. Murat will talk about a few exceptions to that, but it's become a much more difficult environment for fundraising, which is all the more reason why we're here to encourage the government of Tokyo to continue to do such a great job in supporting entrepreneurship by creating incentives in partnership with the central government of Japan, which is doing an awful lot that we can talk about. But the economic headwinds are tough. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I would like to hear about the potential recession. Do you have any prediction about it?
I think that we're going to have a recession globally in the last half of this year, personally. I mean, I've worked in the hedge fund world as a strategist and cover economic conditions at Hudson Institute, in addition to being an investor myself. As an investor and an economist, my assumption is we are going to see a probably harder landing economically than expected because I think that inflation, largely driven by tightness in wages, and that exists here in Japan, it exists in the United States, is going to continue to cause the Federal Reserve to tighten interest rates. And I think that will put us into a recession. Almost every Fed tightening cycle in history that has reduced inflation ultimately had to have a recession. I see no reason to expect we won't have one. But a recession can be the beginning of a new opportunity to restart the economy. That's typically when the interest rates finally start to go down, and that's typically when the financial markets start to rebound. So the recession may be the indicator of the beginning of brighter things to come, actually. So people shouldn't be so disappointed with a recession, at least in the short term.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And next is a question to Serizawa-san. Would you mind sharing your thoughts on this topic in your specific field, such as EU or France?
I think that the Paris Stock Exchange was more affected maybe by the war in Ukraine rather than the COVID, as David said. And it lost 10% last year, and mainly due to war in Ukraine. I think that tighter monetary policy to counter inflation also contributed negatively, of course. But on the other hand, if you look at the largest corporate sector, the profitability is back. And last week, actually, as Wall Street was hitting its lowest, CAC 40, which is the 40 largest corporates in Paris Stock Exchange, hit the record high.
Oh, record high.
Then, of course, it went down again, negatively drawn by the US stock markets, but that's the kind of thing. So I think that in a way, the global trends are shared, but in a different way. And so recession, yes and no, because the recovery from COVID is drawing some new activities, actually, in Europe. And also, I think that a lot of people get a little bit of boost through inflation. It's affecting some people, but it's also positively affecting some people. Now, regarding Japan, already before the war in Ukraine, like 2 years ago, already the mothers, ex-mothers' growth market went down a lot, which really curbed the possibility of IPO exits for Japanese startups. And that was also mainly caused by the fact that evaluation did no longer reflect sales figures. And that was a new trend in Japan. Now you need to be profitable to be able to make a good IPO. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Serizawa-san. And to Murat-san, David-san and Serizawa-san has touched to the IPO market. Since you know well about the startup investment, what's going on the ground? Deal amount, deal count, by stages, or what sectors? Please go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And as a person running a VC fund and investing in startups, I have to be optimistic. So I'll present to you the optimistic version of my take around the world. So 2021 was the highest amount of year with the highest amount of venture capital invested in startups. It was like more than any other year in history. And this excess capital caused valuations to go up to maybe like higher levels than they should be. Like Serizawa-san mentioned, the revenue multiples were very high. And then last year, global venture capital dropped around 30%. And this really affected all stages of venture investing, but mainly later stages. For example, with data, today we are seeing that seed investing, pre-seed and seed valuations have not moved much. They stay the same in 2022. But the Series A dropped around 5%, Series B around 30%. So companies who raised Series B rounds in 2022, they had to take a 30% lower valuation than 2021, and same with Series C. But one positive thing is when the public markets go down and there are mass layoffs, it is a great time to build a startup because you can hire higher quality people at a lower wages. You can really, if you're building a product that people need, you can still sell them. So it's a good business. We believe this is the right time to invest in startups. And I'm very excited to see Koike-san and Tokyo really increasing their allocation for startups 10 times. At the same time, as we all know, there's the war in Ukraine and there was COVID. But we are also seeing natural happenings around the world, like flooding and fires and other things, and people are worried about climate change. So this actually increased investments into climate tech companies trying to solve these problems. Climate tech venture capital increased 89% in 2022 from 2021. Even though global venture capital went down 30%, So we are very excited that real, like startups building real solutions to real problems are still raising money. So I encourage the founders to really go out there and seek capital. And I think even with the 2008 recession, the people who invested in startups during 2008, 9, and 10, they received the highest returns in venture capital ever. Like Twitter and other companies came out of that period. So as a VC, I highly recommend keep investing in startups.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I will go back to the talent acquisition. So as we all know, tech giants laid off so many talents. Is this a good timing to hire new people for startups?
Absolutely. So we are actually always in touch with those people who get laid off. And there are lists that come to us. And our companies, we have now 300 portfolio companies, and they are hiring heavily. So this is a great time to start a company, startup.
Okay, thank you for sharing. And this is a question about technology. And now ChatGPT and generative AI is booming. What do you think about it? How will it affect startup ecosystem? Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great question. So maybe some of you are young enough to remember 2007 when the iPhone came out. Steve Jobs held the iPhone. And in 1 year later, 2008, the App Store came out. This enabled a new wave of startups that started building mobile applications using the APIs on Android, iOS. My background is computer science, and I'm also a programmer. I've done tech startups. So if I were much younger, I would start a company right now building on top of ChatGPT and large language models. Because there is a platform, consumers cannot use it. You need to build a layer, a user experience, UI layer on top of these to build a very successful business. So we are seeing many entrepreneurs building on this new platform, which is like really, it's changing everything.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Sorry about there are so many questions, but I would like to say, are there so many startups who utilize the ChatGPT or generative AI on the ground?
They are just starting to come out. We are seeing many people starting companies, building tools on top of these platforms. I think in the next 2-3 years, they will, like all of us, will be using those tools like daily.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's amazing and interesting. Thank you so much. And now I will move on to the next topics. The topic is how are the roles of startup ecosystem stakeholders evolving? I will start with Serizawa-san. Yep.
Thank you. Actually, I was involved in the creation of a conference called Science and Technology in Society Forum, which is now dubbed as the Davos for Science. It's in its 20th year now and happening every year in Kyoto. So I was lucky because I could see firsthand all of the efforts from scientists and innovators in universities. And I think that actually just around the time we created the STS Forum, also Japanese universities finally decided to go into that mode, but still at a quite modest, I must say, scale. And I think they failed to still attract like business savvy people to help them maybe raise capital or even write a business plan and so forth. I think there should be a bit more interaction between the business world and the academic world. But research is here, and there is some willingness also from major universities. University of Tokyo is one, but many others. And I think it's quite active now. But there's some challenges. Of course, the exit, which I spoke earlier, but also because also, yes, it becomes it takes longer for university-driven venture businesses to become profitable, maybe because of the investments required and so forth. But secondly, also, some people are now cautious because of that possible shift in the monetary policy, as you discussed earlier. And then thirdly, I think David will come to that as well, but biotech and healthcare areas, strong in Japan, but very few Japanese investors want to invest in those areas. And then it's not attractive for the foreign venture capitalists. So we must do something about it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And as you mentioned, we have so many challenges regarding deep tech areas. So how can we overcome such a challenge? Who could take this question? Murat-san or David-san?
Sure.
Yeah.
So deep tech is an area where you need to build a new technology, new hardware, new materials. It takes more capital than usual. And after you solve, let's say, green hydrogen or a material that reduces the temperature in a house or a car, but you spend a lot of money developing this technology, takes a long time, then you need more capital to go to market. So it is very difficult to invest in deep tech. But early stage deep tech investing can be very, very profitable because the returns will be much higher than other areas. Because once you build this solution, the market really creates itself because you have this new amazing technology. So I highly recommend global VCs to look into Japan because it's great diversification. If you're a family office investing in deep tech, you need to have this. It has higher returns, but also it has market creation and economic development opportunities. And in certain countries like the US, there are many government grants available for deep tech companies. So we think it's a very interesting area. So we highly recommend Japanese governments maybe to support more deep tech venture capital.
So in the U.S., we've had this incredible long-term track record with the U.S. Department of Defense, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which of course you may know famously invented the internet. They also pioneered mRNA technology development to create COVID-19 vaccinations, which has saved tens, if not hundreds of millions of lives around the world. Having a DARPA-like entity in Japan has been discussed for decades. There are some special corporations that METI, the Trade Ministry, has established to try to emulate it, but they don't have the scale, scope, and also staff that DARPA has. And then we have a number of other entities that have grown in prominence inside the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy, and then the intelligence community. There are entities like InQtel, which is a venture capital firm focused on the U.S. intelligence community, but it is one of the cutting-edge funders of emerging technology. ChatGPT, one of the biggest applications is creating, I ran very large intelligence programs for the U.S. government in a different life. They use huge amounts of data.
Yeah.
Now, what ChatGPT can do is help you do automated model building of information, natural language processing, so that you can have I've dreamt for years that having an artificially intelligent intelligence analyst who could tell me what I want to know. And that could be the same for you as a venture capitalist. You're trying to monitor the market, trying to monitor all these companies. You have hundreds of companies you're working with. How do you keep track of all this? With these new automated model technologies, because they're essentially modeling data and then putting into natural language text, so it basically talks to you and tells you answers. That can create a type of knowledge synthesis that can really augment. I mean, I know there's been so much work on the metaverse and all this sort of alternative universe. The real thing is being able to harness the power of information that exists in a way that's parsimonious, which means it's short, it's to the point. It tells you exactly what you need to know. And you know, you see this in the movies where the spy guy is going, like Tom Cruise is going, and he's got somebody in his ear, says, turn left, turn right, look up there, and you know, but that didn't exist really until this ChatGPT interface. And what it is, it's an interface on top of a neural network type backbone. But the idea that you could use it from everything from intelligence analysts to financial trading to actual looking for venture capital opportunities to even discovering new types of compounds that might work for treating cancers and things. I mean, it's really a pretty fundamental thing. And it's, in Japan, there are some tremendous programmers, by the way. And, you know, and there are also some people that have tremendous research to draw on. We talked about biotech. It's a sad thing that in Japan, there's so many of the great biologists in the world who win Nobel Prizes, but there's so few biotech companies. So, you know, what I think we need to do is use the fundamental point, use advanced accelerator funds supported by the government, but run by private sector people, okay, who have private sector incentives to get paid bonuses when they succeed, to try to unlock this growth potential, whether it's in software interfaces with ChatGPT or if just mining biological research that's being done at Kyoto University, which is one of the centers in the entire world. So I'm pretty optimistic. If the Japanese government gets the policy right, this country is going to come alive as far as a biotech and venture capital center for the world.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your idea about the accelerator fund operated by our government and the private sector. What will be the key success factors to do that?
Well, I think we should ask. I'm just a part-time venture capitalist. He's full-time.
Number of exits, I guess. Number of exits. And the number of successful companies created, yeah.
Right.
But I totally agree with David. And also, maybe the audience should know more about their deep experience, like David has deep experience in Japan. They both know Koike-san for a long time. And right now, Koike-san is really driving the startup drive, trying to make Japan a much better startup place. So I think the next topic will be about that, right?
Yeah.
We'll talk about.
Yeah, we should.
But
Yep.
if I may, I think AI also gives an opportunity for Japanese, very domestic venture businesses to seek global markets because the cost of going global would go down using AI. Even, you know, like AI, you know, interpretation or
And you know, let's not forget,
translation.
where is Japan absolutely the world leader? Robotics.
Robotics.
So, you know, we've all been seeing for 10 years these Rojin home, old folk home robots that try to help old people, but they're sort of primitive. But with ChatGPT embedded into these things and more advanced motor functions, there's actually an opportunity to start to automate human-assisted living for older people. I mean, it's because up to now, the brain of the device just was the main limitation. It wasn't the mechanics. The Japanese robot companies are brilliant, whether it's the big robots that Fanuc makes for cars, if he builds the Teslas, or the smaller robots that are used for, you know, assisted living. The big thing is software.
Right.
If you get the revolution right now, he's a software expert, that's occurring is in software. And that actually also is occurring inside biotech as well, where the software is enabling a level of research of just amount of data, big data analysis we never could do. That's where the real hope is, I think, of where ChatGPT can come back together with the actual mechanical engineering brilliance of Japan.
Totally.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing the idea. Yeah, it's really interesting. So, now we are down to the final topic. The topic would be how can we make Tokyo more attractive for entrepreneurs and the startups? And Serizawa-san, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that I said that AI could help, but still, I think English should be much more used. You should allow, for example, venture capitals to just announce their figures and balance sheet in English only. You have to change also the closed systems. There are lots of incentives, lots of public support, etc., for venture businesses now, but it's very complex and very difficult to get the information. Also, I think the culture and mindset in Japan. Like risk is still a very negative word in Japan, and a risk taker is a crazy person. I think you have to change that mindset to create a much flexible culture where people can really adapt themselves. Like in France, there's this huge thing called Station F. I believe that now Tokyo wants to emulate that, but you shouldn't be timid. You have to really go strong and big picture, big policies, very clear, simple, and so forth. Not small things. And that needs to really have a strong incentive and so forth.
Yeah, thank you for touching so many things from the mindset to incentive. And this is a question to David-san. What kind of incentive should we have?
Well, I can think of a number of ones, but the one that Murat and I both, I think, agree is most obvious is to emulate a section called the Section 1202 of the U.S. tax code, which does something pretty simple. It allows tech startup founders, okay, and founding shareholders, to take out the first $10 million in profits tax-free, no capital gains tax, provided they hold a company, start a company from scratch, and build it and hold it over a 5-year period. They're allowed to take it out. Now that basically drives angel investing and seed investing in the United States. It is a fundamental factor that has created the venture capital ecosystem in the United States over the last 35 years. And Japan could easily emulate it. Now, this gets into a little bit of political stuff, though. Having been in the government and having known Governor Koike for more than 30 years, I'd say part of the challenge, you as constituents of Tokyo need to lobby the Ministry of Finance. You need to start demand this. I mean, the MOF should not be driving tax policy. The Prime Minister should drive tax policy. And he needs input from people like you as to what would encourage you to want to put money into startup enterprises. But certainly this qualified small business tax credit is something that's important. I also think just attracting money right now from Hong Kong, which is sort of collapsing politically because of the repression on freedom and also on capital markets. The Chinese Communist government's manipulating the market. And people don't like it. A lot of Chinese are trying to leave. I think we should try to encourage a Chinese brain drain from Hong Kong into Tokyo. And one of the things you could do would be to give income tax-free status for the first 5 years for new, medium to large investors, family offices, and funds that want to establish themselves here. Now, that's very similar to what you can get in Singapore or actually in Hong Kong. Tokyo would be seen as they say in Japanese, keshkaran, dirty dealing. But it's really not. I mean, you got to create an incentive because right now, it's so much, even with the cost of doing business in Singapore being so high, the tax is so low that there's over 200 Japanese wealthy families that have moved their family offices, their investment companies, to Singapore to avoid the burden of doing business in Tokyo. So you got to create some sort of incentive, even if it is potentially seen as unfair to certain people. If you want to get the money, which you need to grow the economy and attract the talent, you got to use the tax system to make it desirable. Thank you.
Thank you for pointing out the importance of a tax incentive, and maybe how to say tough part would be how can we change it? So in Japan, national level is controlling the tax incentive. So is there any way or a good example about that to change? Or it might be a difficult question, but
right. Yeah. I mean, I am not a Japanese government employee, or I'm not an economist, but actually this is being discussed by Tokyo Metropolitan Government. Koike-san, Miyasaka-san is really vice governor. He's been talking about this. I think they are working with the national government, but David's point is excellent, and like we came to the same conclusion separately, which is very exciting to me because QSBS will really drive angel investing in Japan, right now it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like this needs to be done. The other 5-year tax break for people who move their like funds to Japan is an amazing idea. In France, there's a founder visa that Station pioneered. Maybe Serizawa can tell us more about that. Like we need that in Japan.
Exactly.
Yeah, founder visa.
Exactly. Like founder visa is one, but as I said, Station F is not just a government impetus. It was first a private sector, and then it's also related, even family related to the largest fortunes in Europe and in the world. So I think this whole, system, new system, but much larger, is needed.
Oh, absolutely. And right now, as Koike-san announced yesterday morning, Tokyo is going to spend around $200 million into these efforts over the next 5 years, every year. So it's around $1 billion. So I think we should look at this issue also from a global startup point of view. Like what would make a global company move to Tokyo?
That's right.
There are some great initiatives they are working on. But I think the Tokyo Innovation Base that Koike-san announced, a physical location, just like Station F, is going to be a great start because if I am a startup from America, I come to Tokyo, I land in Innovation Base, and now I have a network. I can connect with people. I get my founder visa, and investors in my company get QSBS, and I also get like 5-year protection. So I think Tokyo has huge potential. Japan has huge potential. And I think the current thinking is really going in the right direction. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I will go back to the QSBS because as Japan, we have a tax incentive system called angel investors tax incentive, angel税制. But I'm really surprised because the incentive of QSBS is really huge. How is working QSBS in US?
Right. So if you're a founder of a startup, you hold common stock, or if you're an investor in a company, and then you invest in the company directly, you do not buy it on a secondary market, then you hold the stock for 5 years. Then the company exits, you make a profit, and you pay no taxes on your profit. Like as David was saying, angel investing is driven by QSBS in the US. Also, like many angels invest in our funds because of QSBS. So it's really simple. There are some limitations. Like the business cannot be a trading firm or cannot be a retail operation. They really want to drive technology innovation and technology business creation. But it's like magic.
I mean, I founded as a founding investor in a now pretty famous genomics company called 10X Genomics. We started in a parking lot in Pleasanton, California in 2012, actually. Wasn't that many years ago. And as one of the 7 initial investors in the firm, very small amount of money. I'm not going to talk about how much money we made, but the company's now a $6 billion company on the NASDAQ. We started for less than $3 million in investment. And I would say that the name is 10X, but the return on the original investment is probably about 400X. So, that's but getting the first $10 million out and then having, frankly, the ability to bring in your family. Another thing you can do, and your friends and family. So it wasn't just me. Under our LLC, we brought in a whole bunch of other people that invested initially with us. So they all also received the QSBS. And what they've done is like us, we've taken all the profits from this thing and we plowed it right back into more angel investing.
Right.
So, it's an ecosystem and it's a perpetuating positive cycle. And it works. And by the way, I'm a Japanese economic historian. There were a lot of Japanese startups back in the pre-World War I era, and the era during World War I itself, and in the Taisho Jidai. Japan in the 1950s, of course, with no money, had amazing number of startups. Even when the big government guys tried to resist it, Honda Soichiro famously got in a fist fight with the Medi minister and beat him up so he could start a car, he could build four-wheel cars, not three-wheel cars. Okay, I mean, there's a culture of entrepreneurship, and it goes back to Shibusawa Eiichi in Japanese history. We need to return really to Kaikoku, open state model. We need to return to a sort of Shokusan Kogyo, which is this promoting industry through government. And even I'd say today, as we face security challenges, there's something called Fukoku Kyohei, which is strong country, you know, strong, powerful country, basically. But these were all principles that guided the entrepreneurial revolution that created the Keiretsu and before that the Zaibatsu and these great companies. So like, go back to history, Japan. You used to do it. It's not like Japanese can't do this.
No, Serizawa-san, any comment?
Well, because going back to this QSBS, I totally can see already Ministry of Finance saying, okay, maybe we can deduct $1 million. That's typical ichioku-en, you know, like 100 million yen. That can be doable, and not 10. That's the point. I think everything starts too small here. And the angel investment, you know, taxation, it's being able to write off the losses, but it's not about not being taxed on your profits. So it's very different as an approach.
So I just want to say one thing that I think we all agree on, the three of us. I want to propose here, you're mostly Japanese in the audience, for those who aren't, I can translate it. The most used phrase in all of Japanese is shikata ga nai. It can't be helped. What about shikata ga arimasu yo? It can be helped. There is a way. And I think that's what Koike-san is trying to emphasize, and we're trying to say, like, and how does that apply to like this QSBS concept? You can't just do it for like $1 million. You got to make it 10 or even 50 million if to get the
meaningful.
You got to make it really meaningful because it's much easier to start up a company in the U.S. So even if we didn't have QSBS, we'd still have an easier culture. In Japan, it's many times harder, partly because of the government bureaucracy. So, you know, what we got to say is no more shikata ga nai, we can't fix it, nothing we can do. Let's just say this is what we need to do to fix it and just do it. That would be a much more consistent principle with what Japan's government has done at its greatest times of success, such as in the 50s and 60s or in the pre-war years when Japan was a booming economy before World War II. So, you know, again, there's definitely a way for Japan to succeed.
And one more thing. I've been working with many Japanese startups in the past around 7-8 years very closely through JETRO and other organizations. And in Tokyo this week, I also met with some really successful Japanese startups. And I'm seeing one thing in common. They really do not have the information, knowledge, experience about how to go global. So I think we cannot expect them to just go global on their own. They need that information. So we need to give them this information, like how can you go to the US market, the European market? Maybe we need to build networks that can help these companies. But I met with a Japanese company yesterday, and they should be a global company. They have the revenues, they raise so much money, but they only operate in Japan. And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, why are you not in the US, in Europe? And the founder said to me, we don't know how to do it. So I think we need to break that cycle. We need to really push the successful Series A Japanese startups onto the global stage.
From the beginning. Also.
Yes.
Because when you think of it, the Japanese market is shrinking every year for already 10 years in a row. So we already lost like half of Switzerland in 10 years. So we really need to do something about their mindset also. Like looking at the global markets from the beginning.
Yeah.
Very important.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for pointing out the importance of the kaikoku, opening a country and fukoku kyohei kind of things. We should learn more from our history. Thank you so much. And to the panelists, any final words to the audience? Maybe I'll start from Serizawa-san.
Yes, I would like to congratulate Koike-san for starting this City-Tech Tokyo. But Once is not enough. And the first one is always easy. There's excitement about the first event, and a lot of people come from all over the world. But the second one is much harder. Oh, you're doing it again? Oh, already next year? But you have to overcome that difficulty and keep it growing and growing and put it in the ecosystem with all the other incentives and make it a tool for Kaikoku, for opening up Japan. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I mean, obviously, I agree. And we need to, first, I definitely want to thank our incredible Governor Yuriko Koike, who's, not just a famous and important person here. She's a world famous and a leader. And I think what Tokyo does in the coming years can shape world events, actually, in a very positive way. I think that COVID has just caused everything to get in whether the U.S. and also Japan. Everyone went into lockdown mode, covered, this prayed we'd all not die. Okay, well, we haven't all died, thank God. The policies the government took were proper and responsible. But now we got to get back to business, and we got to open up. And again, I would love to have an opportunity to invest in a Japanese startup or early stage company in the biotech area. But I would like to say, just frankly, I have not received any really powerful proposals from anybody. We get proposals from Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, France, Germany, England, all over the United States and Canada and Mexico. I don't think I've ever seen a business plan provided to us or a sort of execution plan. We like to invest in companies which have already started. They're starting to develop something, but they just need to get their A round, their earlier stage capital. I've never, and despite my background in Japan, received a proposal. So if anyone wants to give me a proposal, just I'm right here.
From an audience or or so in the opening speech, Koike-san declared Tokyo Innovation Base for so many future policies, 10x number, 10x unicorns kind of things. That will be fundamental. So we should have a more concrete plan. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you. Murat-san.
Thank you very much. So I lived in Japan very briefly. David has a much stronger experience in Japan. And my wife is Japanese, and I come to Japan quite a lot. We have investors in our fund from Japan. And I love Japan, the culture. I'm originally Turkish, but I would love to see Japanese founders really start more companies and go global, as Serizawa-san said, from the beginning. Think about the global markets. I would love to see more global startups be able to enter Asia through Japan, not Singapore. As David mentioned, Hong Kong is no longer an option. I would love to see more global investors come to Japan, establish their offices here and invest here strongly. And also, we are, as Remarkable Ventures, we are very interested in the Japanese market, and we are talking to some startups. But we need some success cases. And maybe last night I was talking to someone, maybe we need like a Japanese Shark Tank TV show to really have young people watch on television.
In Japanese, Mane no Tora. Shark Tank is a Mane no Tora in Japan.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay, great. But we need more mainstream exposure of startups to young people so they think about starting companies. And right now, these days, I am loving when young people get into the climate technology space because some young people want to feel like they are proud of what they're doing. They want to have meaning in their job. So I would love to talk to more climate startups from Japan.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing so many things. That was really insightful and informative session. Thanks to the panelists. And also to the audience for taking the time. Once again, a round of applause to the panelists. Thank you so much.